The beam of the police officer's flashlight cut across our front porch, a stark, probing eye in the darkness. My mother, Valerie, stood frozen in the middle of the driveway, her designer luggage still clutched in her hands. The blood drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but the only sound that escaped was a tiny, choked gasp. Behind her, the taxi driver cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ma'am, you still need help with them bags?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because what she was seeing, what she was finally being forced to see, was a consequence so far outside her imagination that her mind simply refused to process it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand the look on her face, you have to go back to the beginning. To the morning my own mother handed me $30 and a bottle of water and vanished for an entire summer. My name is Kristen Harrison. I was 18 years old, fresh out of high school, and I thought I knew what struggle looked like. I was wrong. I had absolutely no idea what was coming. My mother was the kind of woman who needed a man the way a fire needs oxygen. My father left when I was 7 and my little brother, Nolan, was just a baby. I barely remember his face. What I do remember is the parade of replacements that followed. There was the car salesman who stayed for 8 months, the accountant who lasted a year, and the fitness guru who moved in for 3 weeks, ate all our food, and left with our microwave. Yes, our microwave. To this day, I have no explanation for that. Through it all, I learned to raise myself, and when Nolan came along, I raised him, too. Mom was always too busy chasing her next romantic high to notice her kids needed things like, oh, I don't know, dinner, clean clothes, or someone to show up to a parent-teacher conference. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for Boyd Carpenter. Mom met Boyd online in April. Wealthy, charming, from Vancouver. Within weeks, she was flying to see him every other weekend, the stays getting longer, the money she left behind getting smaller. By June, I knew this one was different. She talked about him like he was a prince from a fairy tale, her voice taking on a dreamy, desperate quality I'd never heard before. She was completely, utterly obsessed. Then came July 3rd. That morning started with a sound I will never, ever forget. The heavy thump of suitcases being dragged across the hallway floor. Not the little overnight bag, the big ones, the kind you pack when you're not planning on coming back. I found her in the kitchen, dressed for a resort at 7 o'clock a.m., her makeup flawless. Nolan sat at the table, sleepily pushing cereal around his bowl. He was 11 years old and had no idea his summer was about to become a survival story. Mom didn't even look at me as she delivered the news. Boyd had invited her to spend the summer at his family's cabin in British Columbia. 2 weeks, maybe 3. She'd be back before I knew it. It would be fine. I was an adult now, wasn't I? I could handle things. Then she put 2 $10 bills and 2 5s on the counter. $30. And next to it, she placed a single bottle of water. I still don't know what the water was about. Maybe she thought it was a joke. Maybe it was a final, bizarre gesture of motherly concern. Maybe she just grabbed it from the fridge on a whim. But there it sat, a lone bottle of water, like we were contestants on some twisted survival show where the only prize was not starving. Nolan looked at me, his big eyes wide. He was 11, but he was smart. I could see him doing the same math I was. $30, 2 people, an entire summer. I tried to argue. I pointed out the rent was due in 10 days. I opened the near-empty fridge. I told her Nolan needed school supplies for the summer program he was supposed to start. I tried to explain, calmly, that you cannot leave 2 kids with grocery money and call it parenting. But she was already scrolling through her phone, a giddy smile spreading across her face at whatever message Boyd had just sent. She told me I was being dramatic. She told me to get a job. She told me this was her one chance at happiness, and I should be supportive instead of selfish. Selfish. She actually called me selfish. A taxi honked outside. Mom grabbed her bags, gave Nolan a distracted kiss on the top of his head, and walked out the door without a backward glance. Just like that. The door clicked shut, and the house went silent. Nolan didn't cry right away. He just stared at the $30 on the counter, as if sheer willpower could make it multiply. I wished I had that superpower. I wished I had any superpower at all. That first night, after Nolan finally fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and counted the money again. $30. Our refrigerator held half a carton of eggs, some leftover pasta that was starting to smell questionable, a few condiments, and a lot of empty space. The rent, $850, was due on July 13th. An unopened electricity bill sat on the counter. I was too afraid to even look at it. I tried calling my mom around 9 p.m. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice cracking as I tried to sound calm, to not let the terror bleed through. She didn't call back that night, or the next morning, or the day after that. By day 3, I knew she wasn't going to. Some people have savings accounts for emergencies, some have family they can call. We had $30, an empty water bottle, and each other. I looked at my little brother, still in his clothes from the day before because I'd been too exhausted to remind him to change. He trusted me. He believed I would figure it out. He had no idea that I was 18 years old and absolutely terrified. But here's the thing about being terrified. You can either let it crush you, or you can let it fuel you, and I had an 11-year-old boy counting on me. So, I made a decision that night. I was going to survive this summer. I was going to keep a roof over our heads and food in our stomachs. And when my mother finally decided to grace us with her presence again, she was going to come home to a daughter she didn't recognize. She just had no idea how true that would turn out to be. Optional. The original text includes a call to action for subscriptions and comments here. If you're posting this on a platform, you can insert that call to action as a separate block. Now, back to the story. Day 4 started with me staring into our pantry, willing it to magically refill itself. Spoiler, it didn't. We had peanut butter, half a loaf of bread that was going stale, some pasta, and a single can of tomato sauce. I did the math. If we rationed, we could stretch this for another 2 days, maybe. I made Nolan a peanut butter sandwich for breakfast and told him it was a special summer adventure meal. He didn't believe me. The kid was 11, not stupid, but he ate it without a word of complaint. That broke my heart more than anything. He was already learning to expect less. By day 5, the $30 was gone. I'd spent the last of it on milk, bread, and a big bag of rice. Rice, I figured, could stretch forever. My grandmother used to say that rice was the great equalizer. She also used to say that hard work always pays off. I was starting to have serious doubts about that one. Finding a job in July, I quickly learned, was a nightmare. Every fast food place, every retail store, every business within walking distance had hired their summer staff back in May. I was 2 months too late. The manager at the grocery store actually chuckled when I asked, not meanly, just in a, "Honey, where have you been?" kind of way. It still stung. So, I got creative. My first job was cleaning out Mrs. Delgado's garage 3 houses down. When I knocked on her door and offered to do it for $20, she looked at me like I'd handed her a winning lottery ticket. 8 hours later, I had $20, a sunburn, and the unsettling knowledge that Mrs. Delgado had kept every single newspaper since 1987. I didn't ask why. Day 7 brought a new problem, a bright orange notice taped to our front door. Mr. Kowalski, our landlord, was not a patient man. He had a thick Polish accent and a mustache that seemed to bristle with its own separate fury. The notice gave us 7 days to pay the rent or face eviction. 7 days, $850. I had $20 and a sunburn. I called my mother 12 times that week. Each call went to voicemail. By the 8th call, her mailbox was full. By the 10th, I realized I'd been blocked. My own mother had blocked me while I was trying to tell her her children were about to become homeless. I shoved the pain down deep. I had work to do. The car wash on Henderson Avenue hired day laborers, cash at the end of each shift. I showed up at 6 a.m. and didn't leave until 7 p.m. The pay was $65 for the week, and I earned every single cent. I learned things about the inside of strangers' cars that I never wanted to know, but I kept showing up. Meanwhile, Nolan was supposed to start a summer camp that week. The deposit was $40, money we obviously didn't have. He told me it was fine, but I heard him crying in his room that night. A kid from the neighborhood had made fun of him for wearing the same shorts 3 days in a row, called him poor. My little brother, who had done nothing wrong. I wanted to find that kid. Instead, I went to my closet and pulled out my prom dress, pale blue, floor length, the nicest thing I'd ever owned. I'd saved for months to buy it. The consignment shop gave me $35 for it. I told myself it was just a dress, but walking out of that shop, I felt like I'd sold a piece of the girl I used to be, before this summer turned me into someone harder. Day 9 brought another piece of mail, a final notice from the electric company, payment overdue, service interruption in 14 days. I added it to the growing pile of things I couldn't afford to think about. By day 10, our refrigerator held only condiments, ketchup, mustard, pickles. Nolan made a joke about having a condiment feast, and I laughed until I nearly cried. That night, I sat in the shower with the water running and sobbed until I had nothing left. I couldn't let Nolan see me break. I was supposed to be the strong one. Mr. Kowalski came by again, his mustache twitching. 3 days, he said. 3 days to pay or start packing. He wasn't cruel. I could tell he felt bad, but business was business. I went for a walk that night to clear my head, aimlessly wandering the streets. That's when I passed Martinelli's Italian restaurant. A busboy was hauling trash bags to the dumpster out back, and something made me stop. The bags weren't filled with garbage. They were filled with food, bread, pasta, vegetables, containers of sauce, all perfectly good, all being thrown away. I stood there, watching bag after bag disappear into that metal bin, and something shifted inside me. Not hope, not yet, but the beginning of an idea. I approached the busboy before I could talk myself out of it. He was young, with tired eyes and a marinara-stained apron. Was that food still good? I asked. He shrugged. Yeah, most of it. They just can't serve it tomorrow. Health code. Every night. Same thing. My stomach growled loudly. He looked at me for a long moment, then glanced back at the restaurant, then silently handed me 2 of the bags. I thanked him, probably a dozen times, and practically ran home. When I spread the food out on our kitchen table, Nolan's eyes went wide. Fresh bread, pasta, vegetables. It was more food than we'd seen in days. That night, for the first time in over a week, we went to bed with full bellies. But one meal doesn't solve anything, so my brain started working on something bigger. The next morning, I went to the public library. Our internet had been shut off days ago. I spent hours researching food waste and food recovery programs. Turns out, restaurants throw away millions of pounds of perfectly good food every year, and there were organizations that legally collected it. All it took was proper agreements. The problem was, I was an 18-year-old nobody. Why would any restaurant listen to me? That's when I found Mr. Okonwo. Leonard Okonwo ran the community center on Maple Street, a retired teacher, 72, with a voice like warm coffee. Everyone in the neighborhood knew and trusted him. I walked into his center on day 12 with my stack of printed papers and a speech I'd rehearsed endlessly. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he studied me for a long time. Then he smiled. "You have a good heart," he said, "but a messy plan. Success is like my mother's stew. You need the right ingredients, patience, and you have to keep stirring, or everything burns." He helped me refine my proposal, taught me how to approach business owners, and offered the community center as a distribution point. By day 13, I had a real plan. I also had 3 days until eviction and exactly $43 to my name. I went back to Martinelli's, but this time I walked through the front door and asked to speak to the owner. Mrs. Martinelli, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, had owned that restaurant for 31 years. She was not easily convinced. I handed her my handwritten proposal and laid out my idea. I told her about the liability waiver, the community center, the families who could use the food she threw away every night. She read my proposal in silence. Then she asked how old I was. I said 18. She asked where my parents were. I hesitated, then told her the truth. Something shifted in her face. Not pity, she didn't seem the type. It was more like recognition, like she remembered being young and desperate and doing whatever it took. She agreed to a 1-week trial. That same afternoon, Mr. Kowalski showed up. I braced for the eviction notice. Instead, he stood on our porch and studied me. His mustache twitched. He'd heard what I was doing. Mrs. Pritchard's gossip mill was finally useful. He said he'd give us 30 more days, not out of charity. He was quick to clarify, but because he respected hard work. 30 more days. It wasn't a solution, but it was time, and time was everything. That night, Nolan asked me if things were going to be okay. I looked at my little brother, who had been so brave, who had never once complained. I told him yes. And for the first time since Mom left, I actually believed it. The first official night of what I was now calling my food rescue operation was day 14. I showed up at Martinelli's back door with coolers borrowed from Mr. Okonwo. Thomas, the busboy, had everything ready. The next morning, a line of people waited at the community center. Elderly folks, single mothers, a veteran who hadn't had a hot meal in days. I handed out food until there was nothing left, and something unexpected happened. People thanked me, not politely, but with real, overwhelming gratitude. One woman grabbed my hands and told me I was an angel. I wasn't an angel. I was just a desperate teenager who had stumbled onto something bigger than herself. By the end of that first week, the demand was growing, but my supply was just one restaurant. So, I expanded. Golden Dragon Buffet became my second partner. Mr. Wei, the owner, was initially skeptical, but when I showed him the now professional waiver, he nodded. Buffets, he explained, had even more waste. Every night, he threw away enough to feed 30 people. What I didn't know then was that our story was just beginning. The hardest parts were still ahead, but so were the most incredible moments I could have ever imagined, including the one where my mother finally came home and found something she never, in her wildest dreams, expected waiting for her on our front porch. Not anymore. Sunrise Bakery was next. The owner, Patricia Holloway, was a cheerful woman with flour-dusted aprons and a heart just as warm as her fresh cinnamon rolls. When I explained what I was doing, her eyes welled up. Her grandmother had survived the Great Depression, she told me, and the idea of throwing away good food while people went hungry had always haunted her. She just never knew there was another option, until now. Nolan became my right-hand man, my self-appointed CFO, which he proudly announced stood for Chief Food Organizer. He took the job with a seriousness that would have impressed a CEO. He even made himself a little name tag out of cardboard and marker. Every afternoon, he'd help me sort donations, track inventory, and plan the next day's distribution. The kid was 11 years old and running logistics better than most adults I knew. By day 25, we had 6 restaurant partners and were feeding over 40 families a week. The community center had transformed into a bustling hub. Volunteers started showing up, some who wanted to help, others who had been helped themselves and now wanted to give back. Mr. Okonwo coordinated everything with the calm, steady hand of a man who'd spent 30 years herding teenagers. Even Mrs. Pritchard stopped gossiping and started volunteering. I didn't fully trust her yet, old habits die hard, but she showed up every morning to sort bread, and she hadn't spread a single rumor in days. People can surprise you sometimes. Then came day 30. I was in the middle of organizing a delivery when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Except it wasn't unknown. It was my mother's new Canadian phone. The message was brief and brutal. Having an amazing time. Boyd proposed. Wedding in September. Don't bother me with drama. That was it. No questions about how we were doing. No apology for disappearing. No acknowledgement that she'd left her children with $30 and a bottle of water a month ago. Just an announcement about her engagement and an instruction not to bother her. Nolan saw my face and asked what was wrong. I showed him the text. He read it twice, then handed my phone back without a word. But I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not sadness, but something harder. Like the last little piece of him that still hoped Mom would come back and make everything okay had finally crumbled away. We didn't talk about it. There was work to do. Day 33 brought a new challenge. I was at the community center when a woman in a sharp blazer walked in with a clipboard and an expression that meant business. She was from the county health department, and she had questions. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint, reporting that I was distributing food without proper permits, without health inspections, without any of the official approvals that legitimate food operations required. My heart plummeted. I thought about everything I'd built over the past 3 weeks, the partnerships, the families counting on us, the volunteers who showed up every day. All of it could disappear because of one complaint. The health inspector, Dorothy Reeves, wasn't unkind. She could see what we were doing was good, But rules were rules. If I wanted to continue, I needed proper permits, a certified kitchen space, and official nonprofit status. The cost? Roughly $500 in fees, plus finding a commercial kitchen to operate from. She gave me 2 weeks. 2 weeks to find $500 when I could barely keep the lights on at home. 2 weeks to find a commercial kitchen when I didn't even have a working stove in our apartment. 2 weeks to make everything official when I was still technically just a kid trying not to drown. I thanked Dorothy Reeves for the information and somehow held myself together until she left. Then I sat down on the community center steps and tried very hard not to panic. Mr. Okonwo found me there 20 minutes later. He lowered himself onto the step beside me, his old knees creaking in protest, and asked what was wrong. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. He said that obstacles were just opportunities wearing ugly masks. He said every successful person he'd ever known had faced moments exactly like this one. Moments where giving up seemed like the only logical choice. The ones who succeeded were the ones who found another way. I didn't have $500, but I had something else. I had a story. The next day, I called the local newspaper. Jasmine Torres was a young reporter at the Riverside Gazette, hungry for stories that mattered. When I told her about what we were doing, about the abandoned teenager who had turned food waste into community meals, she practically sprinted to the community center to interview me. The article ran the following week with the headline, "Teen Turns Tragedy into Triumph. Local Food Rescue Feeds Dozens." The response was immediate. Donations started pouring in, $5 here, $20 there, $100 from someone who wanted to remain anonymous. Within a week, we had over $2,000, enough for permits, for fees, for everything we needed. But more than money, we had attention. People were sharing the article on social media. Local businesses were reaching out to partner with us. The mayor's office called to express support, and someone at the community center suggested we needed an official name. After much debate, Nolan wanted to call it Food Avengers, which I had to veto for legal reasons. We settled on Second Chance Kitchen, because that's what we were giving people, and that's what life had given me. What I didn't know was that the article had reached further than our little town. It had reached all the way to Canada, and it had set something in motion that would bring everything to a head in ways I never could have predicted. The television interview happened on day 44. Channel 7 News had picked up the story from the newspaper, and suddenly I was sitting in a real studio with real cameras and a real news anchor asking me questions about my life. I'd never been so nervous. The makeup artist tried to cover the bags under my eyes, and she needed a lot of concealer. I told her I hadn't slept properly in 44 days. She just quietly added more powder and wished me luck. Optional. If this is for a video platform, insert the call to action here. The interview aired that evening. The anchor, a polished woman named Rebecca Stanton, had done her research. She didn't just ask about Second Chance Kitchen. She asked about how it all started, about my mother leaving, about the $30, about everything. I hadn't planned to tell the whole truth. I'd prepared vague answers about difficult circumstances and family challenges. But sitting there under those bright lights, something shifted. I thought about Nolan at home watching. I thought about all the people we'd helped who had their own stories of struggle and survival. I thought about how silence protects the people who hurt us. I told the truth. I said that my mother had left Canada with her boyfriend and her young son. He said she'd given us $30 and a bottle of water for the entire summer. He said she'd washed my clothes and spent one check for 6 weeks, not to check on us. It's romantic engagement. I said that everything we did had come from desperation, not inspiration. The anchor's face shifted as I spoke. I could see the fear behind the camera exchanging glances. This wasn't the feel of good story that we expected. This was something more. The segment aired that night for the new headline, "Abandoned Teen Food Street Empire While Another Vacations in Canada." By now, the story had gone viral, not just locally but nationally. News outlets were picking it up, sharing it, commenting on it. My phone exploded with notifications, interview requests, messages of support from strangers across the country. Second Chance Kitchen received more donations in 24 hours than we received in the entire previous month. A local business owner, Mr. Fitzgerald, who ran the catering company, offered us free use of his commercial kitchen. Our permit applications were fast-tracked by the county. We eventually became registered in the county by Detective Jack's office. 12 restaurants were now partnering with us. We were feeding over 30 families every week. Volunteers were signing up faster than we could stand them. But the story had also reached Canada. My mother called on me every day. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She was curious, not apologetic, not concerned, curious. Her face shook with rage as she demanded to know how I could embarrass her like this. Boyd's family had seen the news story. His business partners had seen it. Everyone was asking questions about what kind of woman abandons her children. I listened to her rant for almost 5 minutes without saying a word. When she finally paused for breath, I said one thing. You left us with $30 for nearly 2 months. She sputtered something about me being dramatic, about exaggerating, about not understanding adult relationships. Then she announced she was coming home immediately to fix this mess and set the record straight. She hung up before I could respond. I should have felt scared. Instead, I felt something closer to peace. Let her come. Let her see what we'd built. Let her face the truth she'd been running from. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the news story had caught the attention of more than just my mother. Mrs. Pritchard, my gossipy neighbor who had become an unlikely volunteer, had been carrying a secret for weeks. Back when she was still just the neighborhood busybody, she'd been the one who filed the anonymous complaint with the health department. She'd been skeptical of what I was doing, worried about health risks, maybe a little jealous of the attention I was getting. But as she watched me work, watched me struggle, watched me pour everything into helping people, something changed in her. Guilt, maybe, or genuine admiration, whatever it was, it pushed her to do something else. 3 weeks before the news story aired, Mrs. Pritchard had called Child Protective Services, not to hurt me, to help. She'd reported that an 11-year-old child had been left without a proper guardian for over a month. She'd provided dates, details, everything she'd observed. And CPS had opened an investigation. They couldn't do much while my mother was in Canada, out of their jurisdiction, but they'd been watching, waiting, building a case. When the news story confirmed everything, including my mother's location and her plans to return, they coordinated with local police. Day 47, the day my mother's plane landed. I was at home with Nolan when we heard the cars pull up. Multiple cars. I looked out the window and saw 2 police cruisers and an unmarked sedan parked in front of our house. My first thought was that something had gone wrong with Second Chance Kitchen. A permit issue, a complaint, something I'd overlooked. I told Nolan to stay inside and walked out to meet them. The officer in charge, a tall man with kind eyes named Sergeant Morrison, asked if I was Kristen Harrison. I said yes. He asked if my mother was expected home today. I said yes. She should be arriving any minute. Then he explained why they were there. Child abandonment, neglect of a minor, failure to provide adequate care for a dependent. These were serious charges, he said, and they needed to speak with my mother as soon as she arrived. I stood on my front porch and processed this information. My mother was about to be questioned by police for what she'd done to us. Not because I'd reported her, I hadn't, but because someone else had seen the truth and refused to stay silent. 20 minutes later, a taxi pulled up to the curb. My mother stepped out looking like she'd just left a resort, tanned, relaxed, designer sunglasses perched on her head. She had 2 new suitcases, expensive ones, probably gifts from Boyd. She was already composing her face into an expression of righteous anger, ready to storm in and take control. Then she saw the police cars. Her steps slowed. Her expression shifted from anger to confusion to something approaching fear. She looked at the officers, then at me, then back at the officers. Sergeant Morrison approached her calmly and explained who he was and why he was there. I watched my mother's face cycle through a dozen emotions: shock, denial, outrage, panic. She tried to argue, tried to explain, tried to spin her vacation as something reasonable. But then she made the mistake of looking past the officers, past me, toward the community center 2 blocks away. There was a banner hanging above the entrance, Second Chance Kitchen, serving our community, and beneath it, a photo of me and Nolan, smiling. She stared at that banner for a long, silent moment, then she looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. I wasn't the scared 18-year-old she'd left behind. I was standing tall, healthy, confident. Nolan appeared beside me, not hiding, not crying, but standing with his shoulders back like someone who had learned his own worth. We weren't broken. We weren't desperate. We weren't the mess she'd left behind. We were survivors. We were thriving. And she had missed all of it. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her designer luggage sat forgotten in the street. Her fairy tale summer had ended, and real life was waiting. The officers asked her to come with them to answer some questions. She went. What choice did she have? I watched the police car drive away with my mother in the back seat, and I felt something unexpected, not triumph, not satisfaction, just a quiet, profound sense of peace. Whatever happened next, we had already won. The investigation took 3 weeks. Child Protective Services interviewed me, Nolan, neighbors, Mr. Okonwo, and half the community. They documented everything, the $30, the blocked phone calls, the single text message about the engagement, the 47 days of absence. My mother hired a lawyer. Of course, Boyd had given her money before he disappeared from her life. Oh, yes, Boyd. Apparently, his wealthy family wanted nothing to do with that kind of publicity. The engagement was called off approximately 6 hours after the news story aired. Funny how fast fairy tales crumble when reality shows up uninvited. In the end, my mother wasn't arrested. The charges were serious, but she had no prior record, and the court took into account that Nolan hadn't been physically harmed. She received 3 years of probation, mandatory parenting classes, and 200 hours of community service. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. When the judge asked where she would complete her community service, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I offered to let her work at Second Chance Kitchen. People thought I was crazy. Mr. Okonwo asked if I was sure, his eyes full of concern. Even Nolan looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Why would I want my mother anywhere near what I'd built? But here's what I understood that others didn't. Punishment wasn't going to change her. Jail time wasn't going to make her a better person. The only way she would ever understand what she'd done was if she saw it, if she lived it, if she spent 200 hours surrounded by the community that had supported her children when she wouldn't. The judge approved the arrangement. My mother's first day of community service was awkward beyond description. She showed up in clothes that were too nice for sorting vegetables, her hair perfectly styled, her expression a mixture of humiliation and resentment. The volunteers who knew our story gave her looks that could freeze water. She didn't say a word to anyone. But community service has a way of wearing down walls. Week after week, she showed up. She sorted bread alongside Mrs. Pritchard, who I'd learned had been the one to call CPS in the first place. She packaged meals next to Mr. Okonwo, who treated her with firm but fair expectations. She served food to families who thanked her without knowing who she was. And slowly, something began to shift. I noticed it first in small ways. She stopped styling her hair for service days. She started asking questions about how things worked. She learned the names of regular volunteers. She began arriving early instead of exactly on time. Week 6. She broke down crying during a shift. We were in the back room, just the two of us boxing up meals for delivery. Out of nowhere, she started sobbing, ugly, messy sobs that she tried to hide behind her hands. When she finally caught her breath, she looked at me with red eyes and said something I'd waited my whole life to hear. I'm sorry. Not, I'm sorry. But, not, I'm sorry you felt that way. Just those 2 words, raw and undefended. She said she'd spent her whole life looking for someone to take care of her. After my father left, she'd been so desperate to find that security again that she'd forgotten she was supposed to be the one providing it. She said she'd convinced herself we were fine, that I was mature enough to handle things, that her happiness mattered too. She said she'd been selfish and wrong, and she didn't expect me to forgive her. I didn't forgive her, not that day. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a door you open slowly, checking for traps along the way. But I told her the door wasn't locked. That was 6 months ago. Today, Second Chance Kitchen operates out of a real commercial kitchen donated by Mr. Fitzgerald, whose catering business became our biggest supporter. We partner with 23 restaurants across the city. We serve over 200 families every week. We have a staff of 4 paid employees and over 40 regular volunteers. I received a full scholarship to State University for Social Entrepreneurship. Classes start next fall. Nolan is thriving in school. He wrote an essay about our summer that won a countywide writing competition. The kid has a future in storytelling. Which makes sense, he lived a pretty incredible one. As for my mother, she completed her community service months ago. She still volunteers twice a week. She's not perfect. We're not the kind of family you see in commercials, laughing over breakfast and hugging at every opportunity. Some wounds take longer to heal than others. But she's trying, really trying. She started therapy. She got a steady job. She stopped looking for a man to rescue her and started figuring out how to rescue herself. Last week, she asked if she could take Nolan to a movie, just the two of them. He said yes. Progress comes in small steps. I still have that empty water bottle. By the way, the one she left us with on July 3rd. I keep it on my desk where I can see it every day. Not out of bitterness. I'm past that now. I keep it as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the people who should lift you up are the ones who leave you down. A reminder that rock bottom isn't the end of the story, it's just the foundation you build on. A reminder that $30 and a bottle of water can become something extraordinary if you refuse to give up. My mother saw police cars and news cameras and a daughter she didn't recognize. But what made her gasp wasn't the trouble she was in. It was realizing that we didn't need her anymore. That we'd built something beautiful out of the nothing she'd left behind. That her absence had given us the one thing she never could, the chance to discover who we really were. Some lessons cost more than others, but some lessons are worth every penny. Optional, closing call to action for video platforms.